My aunt tried to take over my life. I ended her scheme publicly. I never thought someone in my own family would go to such lengths to control my life. My aunt, Aunt Lydia, was always a little overbearing, but I never realized just how deep her obsession ran until it was too late. It all started with small things, suggestions that seemed harmless at first. "You should move in with me, it'll be easier," she'd say with a warm smile. "I can help you manage your finances, you're too young to handle everything alone." At first, I thought she was just being protective, a caring relative looking out for me after my parents' sudden passing. I was vulnerable, grieving, and desperate for guidance. But soon, her influence became suffocating. She took control of everything, my money, my personal decisions, even my social life. I found out she had secretly transferred my inheritance into an account under her name, justifying it as protection from bad financial choices. She isolated me from my friends, manipulated me into believing I needed her for every decision, and even attempted to arrange my career path according to her wishes. I felt trapped in a web of lies and control, but the final straw came when I overheard her on the phone. "Once everything is in my name, she won't have a choice. She'll have to depend on me for the rest of her life." That was the moment I knew I had to fight back. And I wasn't going to do it quietly. My name is Emily, and until my parents passed away, my life was stable, predictable, and full of love. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other, and family gatherings were filled with laughter and home-cooked meals. My parents, both hardworking and kind, always emphasized independence, ensuring I had the tools to navigate life on my own. When they died in a tragic accident, everything changed. I was just 21, fresh out of college, and completely lost. The grief was overwhelming, and I struggled to keep up with the responsibilities they had left behind, the house, the bills, and my inheritance. That was when Aunt Lydia swooped in. She presented herself as my savior, offering to take care of everything. "Just focus on healing," she would say. "I'll handle the hard stuff." And in my vulnerable state, I let her. At first, it was comforting. She moved into my family home, took over the financial matters, and handled all the legal paperwork. She made sure I didn't have to deal with any of the burdens that came with losing my parents. But little by little, her role as my protector shifted into something more sinister. She discouraged me from making any independent decisions, convincing me that I wasn't ready to handle things on my own. She insisted on overseeing my bank accounts, claiming it was safer that way. She even intercepted my mail, filtering through important documents and deciding what I needed to know. Whenever I questioned her, she would act offended. "I'm just trying to help you, sweetheart. Don't you trust me?" And with the grief still weighing heavily on me, I gave in, time and time again. But something didn't sit right. Friends started drifting away, claiming Lydia was screening my calls and messages. I noticed discrepancies in my bank statements and withdrawals I didn't make. The house, once my haven, felt more like a prison under her watchful eyes. Deep down, I knew I was losing control of my own life. I just didn't know how to break free, until I discovered the extent of her deception. Aunt Lydia wasn't always the controlling figure she became. Growing up, I remembered her as the charming yet ambitious sister of my father. She was always impeccably dressed, with an air of confidence that demanded attention. She never married and never had children of her own, instead pouring all her energy into her career. She worked in finance, a world she navigated with skill and determination, and I suspect she believed she knew better than most when it came to managing money. But beneath her polished exterior lay a woman who craved control. She always had to be the most knowledgeable person in the room, the one others sought for advice. I had seen how she dictated the lives of those around her, whether it was pressuring my father into investing in her failed business ventures or convincing my mother to host extravagant family dinners that she micromanaged down to the last detail. But as a child, I never saw her as dangerous, just overbearing. My parents, Mark and Susan, were the opposite of Aunt Lydia. They were warm, compassionate, and fiercely independent. My mother was a schoolteacher who believed in the power of self-sufficiency, and my father ran a small but successful bookstore, a dream he had nurtured since college. They encouraged me to think for myself, to pursue my passions, and most importantly, to trust my instincts. They had provided me with a childhood filled with love and stability, which made the sudden loss of them even more devastating. In the wake of their deaths, Aunt Lydia saw an opportunity. With no siblings and no immediate support system, I was alone, and she made sure to swoop in before I had a chance to regain my footing. She framed herself as the only family I had left, the only one who could guide me through the storm. Her words were always laced with kindness and concern, but looking back, I see now that they were designed to keep me reliant on her. At first, I welcomed her presence. She spoke with authority and took charge of all the things I didn't have the emotional strength to deal with. She handled my parents' estate, the endless paperwork, the legalities that overwhelmed me. I was grieving, and she made it so easy to let her take control. But the more she inserted herself into my life, the more I began to realize she wasn't helping me, she was replacing me in my own decisions. She started small, convincing me that my grief clouded my judgment. She'd say things like, "You're not thinking right now, let me take care of this for you," or "You'll thank me later for handling the tough choices." I believed her. I was too exhausted to fight. Then she escalated. She closed my bank account and opened one under her name, just to keep things secure. She isolated me from my friends, making me question their loyalty. She intercepted job offers and emails, ensuring I stayed financially dependent on her. And when I began to push back, she guilt-tripped me into submission, playing the role of the selfless guardian, sacrificing everything for my well-being. I had always seen her as a strong, independent woman, someone to admire. But I was beginning to see the cracks in her facade. I was beginning to see her for what she truly was, a woman who thrived on power and manipulation. The more I learned about what she had done, the more I realized that I wasn't just grieving my parents, I was fighting for my survival. At first, I convinced myself that I was just being paranoid. Aunt Lydia was family, why would you want to hurt me? But the little signs kept piling up, forcing me to acknowledge the suffocating reality of my situation. The first major red flag came when I tried to withdraw money from my account. The ATM declined my request, flashing an error that left my stomach in knots. I checked my banking app, only to discover that my account was nearly empty. Panic surged through me. I called Aunt Lydia, demanding an explanation. She sighed as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Emily, sweetheart, I told you, I moved the funds for safekeeping. You're not in the right state of mind to handle finances. Trust me, this is for your good." I tried to protest, but she shut me down with a sharp, "That money is still yours. You just don't have access to it until you're ready." Her words echoed in my mind for days. When was I supposed to be ready? Who decided that? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was losing my autonomy under the guise of protection. The next incident was more invasive. My best friend, Sarah, had been trying to reach me for weeks, but somehow, I never received her messages. One evening, she showed up at my house unannounced. Her expression was a mix of frustration and concern. "Why haven't you answered my calls?" she demanded. Confused, I pulled out my phone and showed her my call log, nothing from her. Her face darkened. "Lydia told me you didn't want to talk to anyone," she said slowly. "That you needed space to grieve." My heart sank. That explained why no one else had reached out. Lydia had been controlling my communication, deciding who was allowed in my life. That night, I confronted her. "Why did you tell Sarah I didn't want to talk to her?" She barely looked up from her book. "You needed space, Emily. Too many voices would have overwhelmed you. But that wasn't your decision to make." Her eyes hardened. "Everything I do is for your benefit. If you don't see that, maybe you're not as mature as I thought." Her condescending tone set off alarm bells. I needed to take back control, but I had to be smart about it. Over the next few weeks, I started gathering evidence. I quietly reconnected with old friends and asked them what Lydia had been telling them. I saved screenshots of my financial records, noting every unauthorized transaction she had made. I even recorded our conversations when she let her mask slip, when her words dripped with subtle threats. Then, I uncovered the biggest betrayal of all. One evening, while she was out, I searched her home office. My hands trembled as I rifled through drawers, searching for anything that could prove her deception. And then, I found it, a set of legal documents with my forged signature. Papers that transferred ownership of my parents' house to Lydia. I felt sick. She had been planning this all along. She wanted full control, not just over my finances, but my entire future. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I had trusted her, and let her into my life, and she had used my vulnerability against me. But I wasn't going to let her win. I took pictures of everything, making sure I had undeniable proof. Then, I called my lawyer, a lawyer Lydia didn't know about. The next few days were tense. I pretended everything was normal while secretly working on my plan. I arranged a meeting with my lawyer and gathered my friends and a few family members who still cared about me. It was time to confront her publicly, to expose her for the manipulative liar she truly was. When the day arrived, I set the stage carefully. I invited Aunt Lydia to a family gathering at a restaurant, making sure to keep the tone warm and inviting. She arrived, smug as ever, expecting another opportunity to assert her control. But she wasn't prepared for what came next. I stood up, my heart pounding, and laid out every detail: the stolen money, the isolation, the forged documents. I handed the evidence to my lawyer, who was present to ensure she had no way to twist the truth. Gasps rippled through the room as I displayed the forged papers for everyone to see. Lydia's face turned pale, then red with anger. "How dare you embarrass me like this?" I held my ground. "How dare you steal my life?" She tried to deny it, but the evidence was too overwhelming. Family members who had once defended her looked at her in disgust. My lawyer made it clear she would be facing legal consequences. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She had underestimated me. She had thought I was weak. She was wrong. The moment I finished laying out the evidence, the restaurant fell into a heavy silence. Everyone's eyes darted between me and Aunt Lydia, who sat stiffly in her chair, her usually composed demeanor crumbling. Her face, pale and tight with anger, twitched as she tried to form a response. "You don't understand," she finally said, her voice trembling with a mixture of desperation and indignation. "I was only trying to protect you. If I hadn't taken control, who knows what kind of mistake she would have made." I clenched my fists under the table. "That wasn't your decision to make, Lydia. You took my life, my choices, my money, everything. You forged legal documents to steal my home. That's not protection. That's manipulation and fraud." Gasps rippled through the room. Family members, some of whom had blindly defended her, now looked at her with disgust and disbelief. My lawyer, standing beside me, cleared his throat and unfolded one of the documents, the one that transferred ownership of my parents' house to her, complete with my falsified signature. Lydia's expression darkened. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're blowing this out of proportion. I took care of you." I stepped forward, refusing to let her twist the truth any further. "You controlled me. You isolated me. You took away my choices, my money, and my home. But it's over now." I turned to my lawyer. "What are the legal consequences for forging documents and embezzling inheritance funds?" My lawyer adjusted his glasses. Aunt Lydia could face serious criminal charges, including fraud, forgery, and financial abuse. Given the extent of her actions, she could be looking at both fines and prison time. For the first time, true fear flickered in Lydia's eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but then hesitated as if realizing the gravity of the situation. Instead of the arrogance she usually carried, there was now a glint of panic. "I did it for you," she said again, but her voice was weaker, almost pleading. "You don't know how hard it is to make the right choices when you're grieving. I only wanted to help." I shook my head. "Help? You made sure I had no control over my own life. You turned my friends away. You stole what was rightfully mine. That's not help, Lydia. That's theft." A deep silence settled over the room. Even the relatives who had once sided with Lydia now distanced themselves from her. It was clear that no one could justify what she had done. Then, just as I thought she might attempt one final plea, she did something unexpected. She stood up, straightened her coat, and exhaled. "Fine," she muttered. "You want to throw me to the wolves? Go ahead. But don't expect me to apologize." I scoffed. "I never expected you to. But I do expect justice." With that, I turned to my lawyer, who nodded in understanding. "We'll proceed with pressing charges immediately." Lydia shot me one last glare before storming out of the restaurant. For the first time in months, I felt free. The weight of her control, her deception, her lies, it was finally lifting. As I looked around the room, I saw the supportive faces of friends and family who had returned to my side. Sarah placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "You took your life back." And she was right. Aunt Lydia had spent months trying to mold my life into her vision, but in the end, I had taken control of my fate. She was gone. And I was finally free. The restaurant remained quiet long after Aunt Lydia stormed out. I stood there, my heart still pounding, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. I had confronted my manipulator, exposed her lies, and reclaimed my life. But the battle wasn't over yet. As my lawyer reassured me that we had everything we needed to move forward with legal action, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a lingering sense of betrayal. Lydia had been family. At one point in my life, I had trusted her. But now, I saw her for who she truly was, a woman so consumed by control that she had nearly destroyed me to feed her power. Sarah stayed by my side as we left the restaurant. "You okay?" she asked softly. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure. "I think so. It just feels surreal." Over the next few weeks, I focused on undoing the damage Lydia had caused. My lawyer worked to revoke the fraudulent documents and reclaim my inheritance. The legal process was slow and exhausting, but with every step forward, I felt stronger. My financial accounts were restored to my name, and I started reconnecting with the friends I had been isolated from. It was strange to realize how much of my life had been dictated by someone else's will. I also had to deal with the emotional fallout. The trust one had lost, the self-doubt that had crept into my mind, it wasn't something that could be repaired overnight. I started therapy, something I had been hesitant about before, but it helped me process everything. I learned how to recognize manipulation, how to set boundaries, and most importantly, how to trust myself again. Lydia, of course, didn't go quietly. She fought against the legal action and tried to paint herself as the victim, claiming that I had turned on her after everything she had done for me. But the evidence was undeniable. The forged documents, the financial fraud, the witness statements, it all built a case too strong for her to escape. In the end, she was forced to return what she had stolen, and legal consequences loomed over her. Despite everything, a part of me wished things had been different. I wished Lydia had truly been the loving aunt she had pretended to be. But wishing didn't change reality. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. With Lydia finally out of my life, I took a deep breath and looked ahead. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. No more control, no more manipulation, just the open road of possibilities ahead. I made a promise to myself that day. I would never let anyone take my life away from me again. I had spent too long living under someone else's thumb, but now, I was reclaiming my independence, my choices, and my happiness. I was finally in control of my destiny. In the weeks and months that followed, I slowly rebuilt my life. It wasn't easy, but every step I took felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I moved back into my parents' house, my house, after successfully revoking Lydia's fraudulent claims. It was strange at first, walking through the familiar hallways without the shadow of her control looming over me. But with time, it became home again. I surrounded myself with the people Lydia had worked so hard to push away. Sarah remained my rock, reminding me daily that I was stronger than I ever believed. My other friends welcomed me back with open arms, understanding that I had been trapped in a situation beyond my control. It took time, but I started to trust again, to let people in without fear of manipulation. Therapy continued to be an anchor, guiding me through the process of healing. I learned to recognize red flags, to stand up for myself, and to never let someone else dictate my life again. For so long, I had allowed Lydia's influence to shape my world, but now, I was the one in control. As for Lydia, she eventually faded into the background of my life. Legal battles drained her resources, and the weight of her actions left her with few allies. She tried to reach out once, sending a letter full of excuses and half-hearted apologies. I didn't respond. I had no desire to reopen a door that needed to stay closed. Instead, I focused on my future. I started working on the dreams I had set aside, pursuing a career that I was passionate about. I made choices for myself, small ones, big ones, and everything in between. And with each decision, I felt more like the person I was always meant to be. Looking back, I wouldn't say I was grateful for what happened. The pain, the betrayal, the months of feeling powerless, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But I was grateful for what I had learned. I had found my strength, my resilience, and my voice. Lydia had tried to take over my life. But in the end, she only taught me how to fight for it. Looking back, I see now that I was stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. It wasn't easy breaking free from Aunt Lydia's control, but I did it. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that no one has the right to take over your life, no matter how much they claim it's for your good. If you've ever been in a situation where someone tried to control or manipulate you, know that you are not alone. There is always a way out, and there are people who will stand by your side when you take that step. It may not be easy, but reclaiming your power is always worth it. What do you think about my story? Have you ever dealt with someone like Aunt Lydia? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping personal tales. Your support helps bring more stories to life. And if you know someone who might need to hear this, share it with them. You never know who might need that push to stand up for themselves. Thanks for watching, and remember, you are stronger than you think. Until next time.